campers from both camps, from both sides of the lake this morning in a joint chapel. I got my grandbuddies with me. Oliver, that's Oliver there. That's Kyle, with me this week. But you are in for a treat because Pastor Leo comes back to the Bethel pulpit this morning. Hey, give him your heart. You'll be blessed. I'll see you next week.
Yeah, Pastor Ken had to reach deep into the bullpen this Sunday for. Isn't it good to be here today? And I just looking in the worship program. Next week there's going to be a picnic after the morning service. We're going to have hamburgers and hot dogs and watermelon and beans and just a great time. So I'm looking forward to that because I don't have to cook. Pastor Ken and the elders have challenged us with a very simple, straightforward evangelistic strategy. It's known by the acronym PLIG, right? P-L-I-G. Remember what that stands for? What's the P? Pray. What's L? Love. The I? Invite. And G? Have a gospel conversation. You know, that's deceptively simple, isn't it? I have a neighbor that I'm praying for, and we talk across the fence, and I've helped him with some things and different things like that, and I'm hopeful that one of these times there's going to be the opportunity to invite them. Susie and I are planning on having them over for dinner. We want to do that. We want to pray for somebody. We want to invite and maybe even have a gospel conversation. How many of you have somebody you're praying for right now? Isn't that great? Isn't it be exciting when God starts answering all those prayers? You know, it is exciting when we share the gospel and people respond. But, you know, sometimes things don't go always that well. Have you ever shared the gospel and somebody turn on you? That ever happened? I remember when I was going to seminary, I was working on for a trucking company and with some other Teamsters. And there was a young guy there, and we'd been somewhat friendly and so on like that. And one day we were talking, and I started to share Christ with him, and he just shut me off cold and turned on me. And from then on, for the rest of the time I worked there, was antagonistic. Some of you had that happen with family members, right? What do you do when you try and share the gospel and it goes badly? What do you do with maybe the embarrassment, the hurt? When the Apostle Paul wrote the church in Philippi, he was writing a congregation that was suffering for their faith. Suffering not only for following Jesus, but for talking about Jesus. In fact, Paul himself, when he had gone to Philippi to preach the gospel, was arrested by the authorities, beaten, thrown into prison, because he was preaching Christ. The next morning, the authorities came and said, "Now we want you to leave town." Isn't that good news? And the church that he left behind in Philippi was in that kind of environment, and it was tough. And sometimes talking about Jesus can be tough for us. They were hanging on, those believers, but Paul writes in part to encourage them to hang on to their faith. Turn with me to Philippians chapter 2. Verses 14, or verse 14 and follow, just a couple of verses we're going to look there. And we want to look at what Paul says to encourage these believers. All right, this is to encourage us together. He says, "Do all things without grumbling or disputing." Now, aren't you encouraged already? I'm convicted is what that is. Do all things without grumbling or computing. How many things do we have to do without grumbling and computing? Or disputing? All. Is there any time we can ever say, okay, it's okay to grumble now. It's okay to argue now. That you may be blameless and innocent, children of God, without blemish, in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world, holding fast to the word of life, hanging on to the life-giving word of the gospel, staying true to that. Now, if you're thinking with me a little bit, you're saying, wait a minute, Paul is writing Christians to encourage them because they're getting beat up because of their faith, and what he tells them is to stop grumbling and arguing? What's the connection? Well, we gotta go back to context, because as a standalone verse, this works pretty well. I mean, how many of you parents would like me to preach to your kids right now? Yeah. Kids, do all things, in all of your playing and all you're getting along with your chores and everything else, without grumbling and without arguing. Wouldn't that be a blessing? Husbands and wives, employees, on and on the list it goes. But Paul has a very specific context here that starts all the way back in chapter 1 when he begins to talk about his circumstances, because Paul, as he writes this, is in prison in Rome for the sake of the gospel. He's paid a price. And as he talks about it, he says in verse 12, I want you to know, brothers, that what's happened to me has really served to advance the gospel. You see, that's the driving passion of Paul's heart. How do I advance the gospel? He's in Rome. He's in prison. And he's preaching to the Praetorian Guard, and people are getting saved. And there are people out in Rome who are actually talking about Jesus because they think it's going to make things worse for Paul. And Paul says, I'm excited. They're trying to get me in more trouble, but they're talking about Jesus, and that's good news. So when he talks to the church in verse 27, he says, let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel of Christ, so that whether I come and see you or am absent, I may hear of you that you are standing firm in one spirit, with one mind, striving side by side for the faith of the gospel. Paul wants those believers to share his passion for the advancement of the gospel. And to that end, for those believers in those circumstances that are so difficult, they really need each other. They need to stand side by side, striving for the faith of the gospel. They need to stand firm in one spirit, with one mind, intent on the same thing, which is an indication of them, when that all takes place and where they're all struggling together for the sake of the gospel, that's an indication that God's doing something really special there, their salvation. It's an indication to the world that these people can't be shaken. What's going on there? And it's even, Paul says, a witness to them of the coming judgment. Now here's another good promise for us. For it has been granted to you for the sake of Christ that you should not only believe in him, but also to suffer for his sake. Comes with the turf, folks. Sometimes when we talk about Jesus, it's costly. So when it's costly, what do? Paul goes on in chapter 2 and says, if there's any encouragement in Christ, any comfort in his love, if there's anything in the reality of our faith when we come together, be of the same mind, have the same love, be in full accord of one mind, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more important than yourself. This is gospel living. When you go out in the world and you share Christ and you come together on Sunday and it's gone badly, and there are other people who are saying, wow, this really went well and this person is coming and all this, and you just got beat up. You need somebody to come alongside with you and say, hey, I got your six. I did some work with law enforcement back in when I was pastoring in Oregon, and I was a police chaplain with 3 different agencies. And we were in Clackamas County, Oregon, which is it has city, it's urban environment, but it also has thousands and thousands of square miles of forest land. And these deputies are covering this whole area, and sometimes they're out there in areas all by themselves and they don't have any backup. And what's really important to police officers is they know that they got help coming from somewhere. One Friday night, I got a call from the deputy in our area, and I wasn't out that night, but I got a call, and they said, I've got a domestic disturbance in your neighborhood. There's a guy, he's drunk, he's threatening his wife with a sword, and I don't have any cover. Would you go with me? How do you want to spend your Friday night? What do they want to know? I want to know that somebody's got my six. And when we're out in the world and we're striving for the faith of the gospel, and we're trying to advance the gospel and share Christ, and we get beat up, we want to know there's other believers who come alongside with us, who stand side by side with us, arm in arm, to encourage us to hold fast to the gospel, to stand firm, and to keep moving. People who come to church not just to get something for themselves, and we do get stuff for ourselves. I hope you get something out of this, you know. But we're here for one another as well. We treat each other with humility. We think about other people more than ourselves. What a concept. And then Paul points to Jesus and said, he's our model. He had all of heaven's glory. He manifests the glory of God, and he gave that all up, and gave up God form and took on human form, took on servant form. He humbled himself and became obedient even to the death of the cross, so that he could win people back to God, to redeem us and restore us to the Father. As a result of that, God has highly exalted him and put him at the right hand of God. And someday Jesus is going to come back, and every knee is going to bow, and every tongue is going to proclaim that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. And that's how it all turns out. That's the end game. So right now, just like Jesus suffered, we suffered. Like he humbled himself, we humble ourselves. We serve one another. But we do it in hope. And Paul goes on to say, listen, God began a good work in you. He said that over in chapter 1. He says, so you keep working out your own salvation. Keep after it. Keep working into your life the transformation that began when you accepted Jesus as your Savior, because God is at work in you, giving you the desire and the ability to do what pleases him. And then he concludes this whole section, this whole argument, with verse 14. Do all things without grumbling and disputing, that you may be blameless and innocent, children of God, without blemish, in the midst of a crooked generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world, holding fast to the word of life, holding powerfully and strongly and completely to the gospel. Grumbling and disputing can suck the passion for evangelism right out of a church. Amen? It'll do that. Now, I know that nobody here ever grumbles about anything that goes on at church. Right? Grumbling is just kind of endemic in our culture. But grumbling it's a word that, if you're an English major like Neil is, you know that it's onomatopoetic, which means it sounds like what it means, grumble. It translates a word that is the same way, gangusmas. It's grumbling. It's underground. It's undertoned. It's beneath the surface. It happens with one or two others or in small groups. Nobody ever stands up in church and grumbles out loud. Amen? It's this discontent that just kind of simmers underneath the surface, and it spreads that way. And what happens as it spreads, and the grumbler finds other people who are willing to share that grumbling, it begins to emerge in disputing. I prefer the translation arguments, but we get it. We get it. Disputing is what comes out in the open. It's arguing over differences of opinion. This is the thing that pops up And in a tough week when you've been bruised because you've shared the gospel and things have gone badly and you feel alienated from a close family member or a close friend, and you come to church and you want to stand arm in arm with people in the church and you run into grumbling and arguments, what does that do to your soul? See how this is working? If we're spending our time grumbling and griping about things that are going on in church, we're not about the main thing, which is advancing the gospel. Do all things without grumbling and arguing, disputing, so that you may become blameless and pure. Great words. Blameless means the kind of person that you typically don't bring any charge of wrongdoing, or if you do hear something about them, you don't believe it because it just doesn't fit their character. One of my sons had a parent bring a terrible accusation against him at school, and the superintendent and the principal sat down with the parent and said, "Look, we know him. He's been here for a long time. We know his character. We know he's trying to do something good. So let's sort this out." That's blameless. Innocent means unmixed. There's nothing adulterated about it. It's a word that's used to describe metals that are pure and not alloyed with anything. For instance, there's a difference between fine silver and sterling silver. Did you know that? Fine silver and sterling. Fine silver is 99.9% pure. Sterling silver is 92.5% pure. And it's mixed with either copper or zinc or nickel to make it a little more durable so you can use it in flatware, because pure silver is kind of soft. This word translated innocent is what they would have called fine silver. It's unmixed. By disengaging, just stopping grumbling and arguing in the body of Christ, Christ followers show themselves to be the real deal. No mixing of good news and grumbling, no gospel conversations accompanied by arguments. It's incongruous for gospel people to be grumbling and arguing at the same time. Amen? The gospel is good news. That's what we should be talking about. Pastor Ken has taken us through the book of James. And in chapter 3, he's going to come to the passage where James starts talking to the tongue, and I want to skip that Sunday. Yeah. But in chapter 3, verse 10, James says, "From the same mouth come blessing and cursing. My brothers, such things ought not to be so." Yeah. That's kind of what Paul is saying here. We're a people committed to advancing the gospel. We have a high and holy calling to live in a manner worthy of the gospel. We are to be striving side by side for the faith of the gospel. We've got each other's backs. We've got each other's six. We're encouraging each other. We need each other. From the same mouth come gospel, good news, and grumbling, and arguing, disputing. My brothers and sisters, such things ought not to be. Get that? Just by excising that kind of negative speech from our conversations, we show ourselves truly to be children of God without blemish in the midst of a crooked and twisted, perverse generation in which you shine like lights in the world. We live in a culture saturated with discontent. Amen? Can you imagine a Republican and a Democrat having a conversation without grumbling and arguing? Can you imagine a town hall meeting where people listen and interact respectively and not shout out demands and ask for resignations? Can you imagine going on Facebook and not finding this kind of stuff? Or Twitter, or whatever social media you happen to use? It's endemic. And it affects us, all of us. It's a dark, discouraging world. This isn't the way things are supposed to be. So by disengaging from this kind of talk, we show a difference. Paul says we shine as lights in the world. The word lights there is a good way to translate that. It's luminaries. It's used of the stars and the moon and the sun, things that shine in the bright sky. And in the darkness of the world, we shine like stars when we're not grumbling and disputing all the time. When we come together in our church family, grumbling and disputing are gospel killers. We don't need to gather with those we're supposed to be striving side by side with and hear complaints and gripes. And you know, we all have preferences about what we like, don't we? Some people like worship that's quiet and contemplative and meditative and dignified, and they don't really like drums. Right? And there are other people who say, why do we have those drums in a box? Man, we ought to be able to hear those things. You know, I want that bass to really thump. I want it to move me. I want to be engaged with this worship. And we really like that. I remember at one time in this church where that became a really divisive issue. We have some people who love coffee. They love the fact that we've got a coffee bar out back now. And they think it's great. And other people who are just kind of annoyed that, what are we trying to do, make Bethel a Starbucks? Yeah. We have preferences about the room temperature. How many are cold this morning? How many of you are hot? Yeah. I hope you saw all those hands. We can argue about the color of the walls. We can argue about how the things are on the platform or the fact that they're on the platform. We can talk about a lot of different things. We can grumble about Sunday school. We can grumble about the parking lot. We can grumble about how the church is spending money, about decisions that are made, about the leadership, all kinds of things we can grumble and argue about and miss the main point of why God left us here, which is to advance the gospel. So stop it. It's really simple, isn't it? Ask God for the grace to turn negative conversations into positive ones. Now, one of the things, as I've gotten to know Pastor Ken, one of the things I really appreciate about him is his ability to do this so graciously and so easily, and you don't even know what's going on. I've never heard him in an argument. I've heard him talk about some really tough situations without grumbling. What a great gift. Choose gratitude rather than grumbling. Choose contentment over contentiousness. Because we have a great task. And when we do that, we show a difference. Just by doing that, we show a difference. And by the way, not grumbling and disputing, even though Paul is talking to the church and he's talking about it in the context of standing side by side for the faith of the gospel and our conduct together when we come together, it's not just Sunday go to meeting behavior. Kids, you really ought to respond to your parents without grumbling and disputing. That's really true. And couples, you ought to get along without grumbling to your girlfriends or your guy friends about your wife or your husband and arguing with them over things. You really ought not be a grumbler and an arguer and a disputer at work or at school or in the neighborhood, across the back fence, or wherever you find yourself. Because just by taking that out, you show yourself to be the real deal. That God has made a gospel difference in your life. So that when we do have gospel conversations, they have more power, they have more credibility, because God has made a difference in our life. Paul wrote the church in Ephesus about this same time. He was still in prison in Rome. And among other things, he says, "At one time you were darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light. Do all things without grumbling or disputing, that you may be blameless and innocent, children of God without blemish in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world." Brothers and sisters, shine. Father, help us to take this word to our hearts, to hear it, to be challenged by it, to grow with it, to be a place where we are encouraged to be about the main business of your church, which is advancing the gospel, growing in grace and the knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ, encouraging one another, holding one another up, meeting one another's needs, but Father, striving together to see Christ exalted in our world. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. If you happen to be a guest with us this morning, there's tables in the back, some folks that would like to greet you, and we have a gift for you. There's a little connection card. If you would just hand it to them, they'd like to share some things with you. Also, if there is a prayer need, we have a prayer team that's going to be up here. You can come forward, and folks will spend some time. They'll listen to you, and they'll pray for you. It's going to be a busy week with the 4th of July. I hope you have a great holiday and your air conditioning is not broken. Let's stand together and be dismissed. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Go in peace. Amen.